You all know that Zach Wedashek, our youth minister, is also in the National Guard, and he has weekend duties once in a while. On those Sundays in which he's not here, we've just simply called that Family Sunday, and we've encouraged you to just have your kids in worship with us. But we're going to start something a little different. On the Sundays that Zach is not here because of guard duty, we're going to have a little children's message up front. So, if you feel like a kid, no, really, if you are a kid, if you normally go down to junior church, I have a gift for you. This may encourage you to come up front. So come on up, kids, and just have a seat here, and we're going to just talk a little bit about making some choices. If you're in children's church normally, come on up front, and you'll walk away with something, I guarantee it. Let's go ahead and have a seat. Go ahead. Yeah, sit right there. That's good. Anyone else? Okay, Bob, come on up. I know sometimes Zach has a dozen and a half kids downstairs, so it varies from Sunday to Sunday. All right, you guys are going to like this. No one else? Free gifts? I have some things in here for you. I want you to choose something. Don't say what your choice is until you see all of the options, okay? I have for you some really good tasting bananas, and I know they're good tasting because Kalita just ate one in church. I had 3. So I have 2 bananas. I have a banana peel. Or I have balloons. And it's your choice. You can choose to have a banana, or you can have a banana peel, or you can choose any color balloon you want. Which do you want? What do you want? Banana peel, or a balloon? Balloon. A balloon, okay. Well, you reach in there and grab the color you want, okay? Which do you want? You don't want the banana peel. What are you going to do with it?
You could eat it.
I'll give you a real banana, but not the peel. The peel was just a joke. You want the banana? No peel. That was the joke part. The banana. Okay, I'll give you a banana. I don't think Mom would like me giving you a banana peel. So, there's a banana. What do you want, banana or a balloon? There's all sorts of colors in there. Oh, not gray. Nice gray color. Shiny gray. All right. Okay, guys, the reason I wanted to do this was to let you know that sometimes we can make choices, and sometimes a choice that we make might not be the best one, which is why I didn't give you the peel. Because the peel's not the best thing to choose. But we can make choices. And sometimes when we don't make good choices, we have to deal with that afterwards. And what we're doing upstairs here is we're starting a series of stories or messages, we call them sermons, on a book in the Bible called Philippians. It's called that because the Apostle Paul, who wrote the book, wrote it to Christians who were in a city called Philippi. And so if they lived in Philippi, they were a Philippian. You ever hear of anyone, has anyone ever called you a Michigander? You're Michiganders. Do you live in Michigan? You're Michiganders. So that's the same with those people in the city of Philippi. They were Philippians. But these were the Christians. This was the church that was in that city. And so Paul wrote this letter, and he wrote the letter from prison. He wrote the letter when he was in Rome, and he was chained to Roman guards. And he wasn't sure if he was going to live or die. But what he wrote about was making the best choice no matter what the circumstances were. I can guarantee you that out of the 3 things I offered you, the banana peel was not the best choice. And I prevented you from taking that back because, people slip on banana peels. Yeah. Is that what you had in mind? Oh, you were going to give it to him. Okay. But sometimes we do make poor choices. And sometimes we are given things we don't have any choice. What do? Do we get upset? Or do we find out that there's ways we can work through that? And there's things we can learn from it. The whole book of Philippians is a book in which Paul was writing about dealing with the choices we have made, or being given some things in spite of everything else we wished we could do. And Paul said, I am going to choose myself, no matter my circumstances, to be happy. And that's what Philippians is about. It's about choosing and finding the road to joy. So no matter what we face, no matter what troubles we have, we can choose to follow God, and we can choose to be happy. Okay, enjoy your real banana, and enjoy your balloons. Thanks, guys. Anyone else want a banana? All right. Last week we didn't have time to really delve into the whole message, but I did share with you the opening thoughts, or the tie-in between the resurrection of Jesus Christ and this book to the Philippians, this letter to the Christians at Philippi. When we are beside ourselves, when we don't know what to do, we need to have an attitude adjustment. And that's what Philippians 1 is about. This is the first in our series on finding the road to joy. And I talked last week about two people who were traveling back to another city or a town west of Jerusalem called Emmaus. And they were traveling back on the Sunday that Jesus arose. These followers of Jesus were crushed. Their hopes were dashed. They had witnessed the one they called their Lord murdered. And now with Jesus gone, they had no direction, no purpose, and no peace until that Sunday. Until that Sunday that they encountered the resurrected Lord. And I want you to know, as we get into the book of Philippians, we can find the road to joy when we discover that Jesus always keeps his promises. He always has, and he always will. Let's take a look at Philippians chapter 1. And there's three passages here that I want to talk about in this need for us to adjust our attitudes and the way we think about things. Paul spent the first 11 verses of Philippians talking about his joy in the Lord, even though he was a prisoner. And then he started getting into his teachings, in spite of his chains, about how they can be content. In Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 through 14, Paul starts out by saying, we can be joyful in spite of our circumstances. So you want a balloon and someone gives you a banana peel. You can still be joyful. Look at what he says in Philippians chapter 1, verses 12, 13, and 14. He says, now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. They knew they were receiving this letter from Paul, but they also knew that he was imprisoned when he wrote it. Now, when you know that someone is facing a terrible obstacle, and you know that they're dealing with harsh issues in their lives, and you know that it could even take their life, and you get a phone call, or you get a text message, or they send you a Facebook message, or you actually get a letter in snail mail from them, aren't you anticipating what you're about to read when you realize who wrote it, who it came from? You're anxious about it? That's what the Philippians were feeling when they received this scroll written from Paul. I want you to know that what has happened to me, it has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all to do more, and dare all the more, I should say, to proclaim the gospel without fear. He's saying, hey, you've got a family up here in Rome. You're not by yourselves. You have believers who are part of the family of Jesus Christ. And I want you to know that because they see what God is doing through me in spite of my chains, they're emboldened. They are encouraged, and they're doing all the more for the gospel of Jesus Christ. We can be joyful in spite of our circumstances. Paul, I should say, in spite of what he was facing, did not see himself as a victim. When we see ourselves as a victim, we're nothing more than the sum of the things that have happened to us, the sum total. We're going through the poor me's. How many remember, and I know I'm really dating myself here, and I'm going way back there. How many remember the old TV show Hee Haw? Okay, I don't see one teenager raising their hand. In the show Hee Haw, there was always a weekly clip or a weekly song. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. Deep, dark depression, excessive misery. If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. How many remember that? Been a long time, hasn't it? But don't you know people who live their lives that way? If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Man, my life is trash. It's garbage. There's nothing good going on. Look at Paul. Paul was imprisoned in Rome. And not only was he imprisoned in Rome, he was held in his stocks and in his chained, and chained to not just any prison guards, but he was chained to Caesar's guards, the praetorium, the elite guards. These were the ones who personally were the bodyguards of Caesar, and they only guarded the worst of the worst or the most dangerous of criminals in the Roman jails. And here's Paul being guarded by men who would just as soon cut his throat. And he's saying, they have become Christians. They have listened to my message. He was advancing the gospel. He was proclaiming the gospel. It was progress. And he says, God is going to use whatever my circumstances as I give them to him. I don't have to have a pity party. He is going to advance his work through me as I give myself to him. And so we have two choices when we're down and out. We have two choices. One is to say, why did this have to happen to me? But the other choice is to say, what does God have in mind to use this situation for his glory? And we can choose one or the other. Verse 13 says, it's become evident at the whole palace guard and to the rest of the people about my chains in Christ. Now, what's he talking about? This palace guard, we said, was the praetorium. And here's the details that I found out about the praetorium guard. When they were assigned to prison duty, to chains, they were chained to the prisoner, and they rotated every 4 to 6 hours. And so for a 2-year period that Paul was captive in Rome, he had a congregation of the finest regiment of the Roman army. They were with him. They witnessed what he said, what he did. They witnessed who came in to visit him. And Paul was literally chained to these men in their rotation for 4 to 6 hours a day. Now, can you imagine when a particular guard's duty was over and he went back to the barracks and his buddy says, well, what kind of duty did you get today? Oh, man, I was chained to this little Jew from Tarsus. Everyone's talking about him. All he talks about is some guy named Jesus who was crucified. But supposedly, he rose from the dead. This little guy says that Jesus somehow came back alive. But all of us know how final a Roman crucifixion is. And you know what he does all day long? He dictates letters to a group of followers of his friends that he sends out to people who follow this Jesus. Every hour of the day, all this little guy from Tarsus does is talk about Jesus. Well, guess what? He was talking about Jesus so much that some of these guards were becoming Christians. Paul was literally chained, and he was facing the very potential of dying. But he didn't let that restrict him. He reached out, and he shared no matter what his chains. We've got our own chains. Some of us are chained to desks, and we're chained to our jobs. And we might say, what chance do we have to serve Christ if we're working a full-time job? What chance do I have to say anything about Jesus to this group of people? They're only going to laugh, and they're only going to mock, and they're only going to cut me off. Some of us might be chained to illness. You might be saying, there's not a whole lot that I can do with my health situation. What in the world can I do because of what is burdening me? Or perhaps you're a young parent and you're chained to a 2-year-old. And I know sometimes it feels like chains, doesn't it? But what can you do to serve Jesus when you're busy at home, when you're raising your kids? There's no time for anything else. When we are young, it may be the children. When we are in our middle-aged, it may be our responsibilities. When we are older, it may be our health. But we always face limitations of some type. And we need to meet the challenge of not seeing these things as discouragements, but view them as God's given opportunities. Paul was in prison, chained to the elite Roman guard, to Caesar's guard. And he brought Jesus to them. Paul's conclusion in verse 14 says, most of the brothers in the Lord, having become confident by my chains, are bolder to speak without fear. The way he handled his difficult circumstances in his life helped his fellow believers become more confident and go out and share the love of Jesus Christ without fear. Is there anyone encouraged in the faith by what they see demonstrated in our lives? Are we sharing Jesus? No matter what our circumstances are. You see, that's the important thing. But secondly, in verses 15 through 18, we discover that we can be joyful in spite of what others do. Now, it's not just what others do to us, it's what others do against us. It says in verse 15, it is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. Let me back up and say, there were some who saw Paul in prison and they thought they could make his life worse if they pretended to be Christians and started preaching Jesus. And they thought that Paul would get the trouble in prison because of that. Verse 16, the latter do so out of love, if they're preaching out of goodwill, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former, the ones who want me to get in trouble, are preaching Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing they can stir up trouble for me while I am in chains. But listen to what his answer is. But what does it matter? The important thing that is in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of that, I rejoice. So not only am I chained to the elite Roman guard, not only am I thinking that I might die instead of be released from this prison, I'm also rejoicing because some people are wanting to cause me trouble. Because in causing me trouble, they're sharing the name of Jesus. You see, Paul is saying that in spite of what others do, we can rejoice. The Message says it this way. The Message is a modern paraphrase, and it takes these verses and says it this way. And I think it was very clear, so I wanted to share it with you. It's true that some here preach Christ with me out of the way. They think that they'll step right into the spotlight, but others do it with the best heart in the world. One group is motivated by pure love, knowing that I am here defending the message, wanting to help. The others, now that I'm out of the picture, are merely greedy, hoping to get something out of it for themselves. Their motives are bad. They see me as competition, and so the worse it gets for me, the better they think it will be for them. So how am I to respond? I've decided that I really don't care about their motives, whether mixed, bad, or indifferent. Every one time one of them opens his mouth, Christ is proclaimed, and for that I cheer them on. That's, he says, is the bottom line. I want people to know Jesus. Vance Havner said this. I'm not sure who Vance Havner is, but I like what he said. He said, the hardest instrument to play in all of God's orchestra is second fiddle. Everyone likes to see the first violinist. Everyone likes to hear the first trumpeter. Everyone likes to know that they can rub elbows with the one who is the star of the orchestra. Well, me, in 7th grade, I played third clarinet, last seat. I didn't play second. I played the bottom of the bowl, and I didn't play all the notes. Eventually, I gave up. But the principle, as Paul sees it, is that if Jesus Christ is number one in our lives, we don't have to worry about who is number two or even who is number three. We simply use everything we have and all that we are to proclaim Jesus. And so that leads us to the final thought here, that we can be joyful in spite of an uncertain future. And Paul's future was very uncertain. He says at the end of verse 18, "Yes, I will continue to rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage, so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or death." Paul said, I don't know if this is the last letter I'll ever write to anybody. I don't know if I'll draw my last breath tomorrow morning. But no matter what happens, I am going to be joyful. The future is uncertain to me, but it is not uncertain to God. He knew that his deliverance would come. And it was going to come one of two ways. He knew that he might be released from prison, or he knew that if he died, he would be with the Lord. And he said, either way is fine for me. Do you remember the response of 3 young Hebrew men in Daniel chapter 3? Their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Do you remember in that Old Testament story that the king said everyone needed to bow down to the golden idol that represented me when the horns blew? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, being devout Jewish men, refused to bow. And so they were thrown into a fiery furnace. And in verses 16 through 18 of Daniel chapter 3, we find these words. O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve will be able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hands, O king. But if not, it needs to be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. If God chooses to deliver us, he will. But if we die, we are still going to be his. That's confidence, folks. That's saying, I will be delivered either from the flames or I will be delivered through the flames. And neither is going to take me away from God. God would deliver them. And this was something Paul was saying. He was saying, I will either be delivered by being freed from this prison, I'll be released, or I'll be delivered by death, and I'll be with Jesus. And this is the kind of attitude we need to have. This is what we need to display when we face trials and difficulties, because God is still always able to deliver his people. He will deliver us. We do not have to sing gloom, despair, and agony on me. We don't have to have a pity party. We can recognize that God is our strength, and with the Holy Spirit's help, with his comfort and with his encouragement, we will find ourselves safe in the arms of the one who died and arose. It is Jesus Christ that John says through Jesus Christ, that it is the Spirit, the Helper, who is going to abide with us forever, who will help us when we face obstacles of any kind. He dwells in us. He will be with us. Now, Paul was in Rome. Paul was under arrest. He was in Caesar's jail. And he was facing the possibility of his execution. But he experienced peace, and he experienced the encouragement of the Holy Spirit. No matter what difficulties you and I might be facing, we have to understand that as Christians, this same comfort is available to all of us in any given situation. So, why bother studying the book of Philippians? because we need to discover the road to joy. In the first chapter, we learn that there is joy in living, whether or not we get what we want, in spite of difficult circumstances, and even when there are conflicts. In the second chapter, we learn there is joy in serving. It starts with a right attitude of humility. It is maintained through a right theology, belief in God. And it is encouraged by right models and right examples. In the third chapter, we learn there is joy in sharing. Paul shares three things in that chapter. He talks of his testimony, he talks of his goal of life, and he talks of his reason to be encouraged. And finally, in the fourth chapter of Philippians, we learn there is joy in resting. One of the finest things ever written in all of human history on the subject of personal contentment is found in Philippians chapter 4. And I hope you look forward to us studying that together. In the meantime, it's a short book. Read it this afternoon. Look at these 4 chapters and understand that we can discover the road to joy. In spite of circumstances, we can discover joy. In spite of what others do, we can anchor to joy. And in spite of an uncertain future, we can share joy. That joy, that peace, that hope, that love, that laughter comes only from having a real and personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That we can choose. Some things we can't. Some things are just thrown upon us. But that we can choose. To know him and to know his joy. We invite you this morning to know Jesus, to follow Jesus, and to share his love. We invite you to make a real commitment of your life to the one who wants to get rid of the poor me's and the gloom and the trouble that we seem to face. He wants to turn our lives right side up, even if the world's turned us upside down. Would you come to Christ? Would you know his joy? Would you discover that road that leads you to him? You can do that today. You can respond to him in faith and obedience this morning. We invite you because he invites you to know what real peace and contentment and joy is all about. And if you're ready to make that kind of commitment, you can come forward this morning as we sing this song together. Let's stand and let's sing.